I'm sure Rolex was expecting a huge Christmas bonus. Instead, they got a lump of coal. The French Trade Authority has fined Rolex France and the Hans Wilder Foundation 91 million euros. And why? Because Rolex prohibits the online sales of their watches in France. Wow. The implications for this are staggering. Let's get into it. So first, let me say I don't speak French, so I'll likely mess up the pronunciation. And so I'll show the text of the names on screen as they come up. Truly, this is the biggest challenge to the Rolex business model I've seen in years. If this fine is upheld, then yes, it's true. Their entire business model is being challenged. So here's what we will cover in this video. First, what happened exactly? What was the nature of the ruling? Second, what options does Rolex have in terms of appeals? Third, what are the implications for the gray market? And fourth, what would happen to the Rolex brand if online sales are mandated? I am not a legal expert, but I can, as an economist, speak to the anti-competition and antitrust aspect of this case. So what happened exactly? Well, the reports say that the reports that I've read mention actual, quote, dawn raids on Rolex ADs. Wow. What does that even mean? I picture these commando units dropping down from the sky from Black Hawk helicopters. Seriously, was that even necessary? Well, in any case, here's what happened. Due to referrals from the Union de la Bijouterie and Pellegrin et Fils, the Autorité de la Concurrence, I know I messed it up, I don't speak French, has fined Rolex France for prohibiting its retailers from selling Rolex watches online for more than 10 years. That's 10 years, folks. So that includes the parent Rolex company and the Hans Wilder Foundation. And like I said, the fine is 91,600,000 euros. So what exactly is the crux of the legal argument? Let's cut to the chase. Rolex argued that restricting online sales is necessary to fight counterfeit watches and off-network selling. So we all know what counterfeit sales mean. It's true that fake Rolex watches have gotten really good now. They are even copying the movements. But what are off-network sales? I'm thinking backdoor unauthorized sales, especially to flippers. And we all know that's been a real problem for years, especially with the pandemic. And all those arguments were rejected. Why? Because of two reasons. And one of them is a huge blow to Rolex. The first reason cited by the trade authority was Omega, Cartier, and other high Swiss brands. Those brands clearly face the same risk as Rolex, but they still allow online sales. So why can they do it and not Rolex? The trade authority notes that competitors have developed technological solutions to the problems of counterfeits and back-end sales. So their contention is this: clearly, prohibiting online sales is an overreaction to these problems. And to prove their point, wow, they're pointing to the second reason. And what is that second reason? This one makes your head spin. It's the CPO program. Yes, that's right. The contention is that Rolex themselves have developed an online channel to sell Rolex watches. And it's specifically designed to guarantee the authenticity of those watches. And clearly, Rolex does not view this as a risk to their brand image. Otherwise, why would they have done that? Now, let's think about what that means. Did Rolex sabotage their own business model? Could it be that the existence of the CPO program jeopardizes their time-honored AD sales channel? This is huge. So does Rolex now look at that program, the CPO program, and say, we've got to kill this thing? The overall point is that the prohibition of online sales is anti-competitive and hurts consumers. Specifically, they point to this section in the distribution agreement. Quote, "We confirm that under no circumstances can our authorized retailers who are the only parties authorized to sell our products, do so via the internet or by mail order. Any sales via the internet contravenes the provisions of Article 4.3.b of the Selective Distribution Agreement signed by our authorized retailers, unquote. And that's the problem, the word retailers. This is another word for resellers. What the trade authority is saying is that Rolex can control their own direct sales channels, like Booker, but they cannot prohibit online sales from resellers because those resellers are not Rolex. Do you see now why this is so huge? The implications. Except Booker, Rolex sells their watches through authorized resellers. And this ruling essentially says those resellers can use online sales if they want. And if I'm reading this right, there is an even more shocking aspect of this ruling. Yes, even more than the online sales. I'll get to that in my conclusion. So what options does Rolex have? Well, there is an appeal process. It goes in 2 steps. First, Rolex can file an appeal with the Court of Appeals, Paris Court of Appeals. This is the specific body that reviews decisions made by the trade authority. The court will review the legal and factual basis of the ruling. The outcomes are the following. It may confirm the decision, the ruling. It could reduce the fine or annul the decision. However, annulling the decision would require finding that there was a serious factual or legal error on the part of the trade authority. If that fails, then Rolex can file with the Court de Cassation, which is the highest court in France. We should note that this high court only reviews legal questions and not factual ones. So the 2 outcomes that are possible are dismiss the appeal or refer the case back to the Court of Appeals. Based on that, you can guess that winning an appeal is difficult. Even if the highest court supports Rolex, the case is simply referred back to the appeals court that originally ruled against Rolex. So what are Rolex's chances of getting this overturned? Again, I'm no legal expert, but my personal research says it's pretty low. The records show that the French Trade Authority has a solid reputation for winning its cases. In fact, one source cited a 93% success rate of winning appeals in 2019. So it looks grim for Rolex. There is one other option. Rolex can submit a complaint to the European Commission. The request would be to investigate whether the French Trade Authority's decision violates EU competition laws. And during that investigation, Rolex would seek an injunction. But there's another issue. What are the implications for the EU market? Because here's the thing. Competition laws in the EU are generally harmonized across states. There are 3 reasons for this. First, because the EU as a common market has a common legal framework. The EU has a set of competition laws outlined in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. These rules apply to all member states. Second, there is centralized enforcement. The European Commission acts as the central enforcement body for EU competition laws. They investigate violations and fine companies, which leads to the 3rd reason. Judgments from national courts on competition matters are generally recognized and enforced in other member states. This again supports consistency in competition laws. And you know what? That's another huge problem for Rolex. If the French Trade Authority wins, then other trade groups or government agencies could challenge them in their respective states. This anti-competition ruling could spread to other EU member states. Wow. So what does this mean for the gray market? If the ruling is upheld, well, it's devastating. One of the unspoken advantages of the gray market is that they do online sales. For example, Watchbox sells watches on both their website and on eBay, probably other online platforms. And so do almost all other gray dealers. And having Rolex offer watches online would take away one of their biggest advantages. There is some economic research that suggests online sales result in a concentration of sales. One example is Amazon. They have been killing retail stores everywhere and squeezing out other smaller online outfits to the point that they have been forced to sell on Amazon. So it's possible that if Rolex allowed online sales, they would easily dominate the market. And ironically, this would result in more anti-competitive rulings against them. But what happens to their brand? If their watches are offered online, will it damage their reputation? It very likely could. Rolex is sold as a Veblen good. I talked about it before. Basically, exclusivity is central to their appeal. Now, I've seen Rolex watches offered on Walmart's online store, but those were offered by gray dealers. Selling online may reduce the appeal of Rolex as an aspirational luxury item. Now, the broader implications for Rolex and their brand is a complex topic, so I'll post a follow-up video going in depth on this. But what about that other shocking aspect I mentioned? If I'm reading it right, it will be missed by most people, but it's pretty huge. The ruling says that the French Trade Authority was not convinced by the evidence that Rolex had enforced a pricing structure on its authorized retailers. Wait, is that right? Are they saying that Rolex doesn't enforce prices on their watches? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm reading a translation. But if this is true, then the implications are even more huge. That would imply that Rolex ADs in France actually have the freedom to set their own prices. Is that true? I don't believe that. We'll have to follow this case closely as it develops, but imagine the implications of that. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, so that's it for today. I'll post some follow-up videos analyzing the potential impact on Rolex's business model. I'll see you in the next video.